Hurricane Milton. It's got everyone talking, and honestly, after digging into these articles, I can see why.
Definitely a cause for concern.
Right. It's one thing to talk about hurricanes in general, but when you see a potential Category 5 aiming for a place like Tampa Bay, well, let's just say it's got our attention. What is it about Tampa Bay specifically that makes this situation so worrisome? I mean, everyone knows Florida's hurricane prone, but this feels different.
It is different. This isn't just a Florida problem. It's a perfect storm of vulnerabilities, and a lot of it comes down to Tampa Bay itself, especially with Milton's projected path.
Yeah, the Hurricane Center is predicting a direct hit, potentially as early as Wednesday. And at Category 5, strength no less.
And that's the thing, right? Category 5, that's the highest on the scale. We're not just talking strong winds here.
Exactly. For those of us who haven't experienced a hurricane firsthand, break it down for us. What does a Category 5 actually mean on the ground?
157 miles per hour, at least. Sustained winds, not just gusts. Think about it strong enough to rip roofs right off buildings. Trees down, debris becomes like missiles flying through the air.
The articles you sent, though, that AP News one especially, kept saying the surge is the real danger, even more than the wind itself. Something about Tampa Bay making it worse.
Right, because it's not just about how strong the hurricane is. It's about what happens when all that force hits the coastline. And Tampa Bay, well, it's almost designed to make a bad surge even worse, geographically speaking.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. This is where it gets really interesting. Explain this whole surge thing. What makes Tampa Bay so uniquely susceptible?
Imagine the Gulf Coast, particularly around Tampa, like a giant ramp for the water. Shallow slopes, gently up towards the shore. This is the continental shelf there.
Okay, so a gradual incline versus like a steep drop-off.
Exactly. So this Hurricane Milton that comes barreling in, pushing all this water ahead of it. But because of that gradual slope, the water has nowhere to go but up, up, up.
Ah, I see. So it piles up, essentially.
Exactly. It's trapped. That shallow shelf acts like a giant ramp, and Tampa Bay itself is pretty shallow too, so even less room for all that water to go.
So, like, if you poured the same amount of water into a bathtub versus a tall, thin pitcher?
You got it. Bathtub's going to overflow way faster, way more dramatically, and we're talking a potential 8 to 12-foot surge with Milton. That's a lot of bathtub.
And even Hurricane Helene, which just brushed past last week, that still caused some serious surge inland.
Right, and that was a near miss. Helene was a wake-up call, but a small one compared to what Milton could be.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. With a coastline like that, you'd figure Tampa Bay must gotten slammed by hurricanes before, right? What's kept it from a major disaster, historically speaking?
That's the big question. Last time a major hurricane actually hit Tampa Bay directly was 1921.
1921? Seriously?
Yep. Back then, the city was a fraction of its current size. Since then, it's mostly been near misses or weaker storms.
So Tampa's been on a lucky streak for, what, over a century?
Pretty much. But that luck can create a false sense of security, especially with how fast Tampa's grown.
Yeah, that AP article mentioned something like 50,000 new residents just between 2022 and 2023 alone.
Exactly. So many newcomers who've never even experienced a hurricane, let alone one in Tampa Bay. And even long-timers. There's this it can't happen here mentality that can set in after so long.
Complacency.
Yeah, and that's dangerous. Because this isn't the Tampa Bay of 100 years ago. The stakes are way higher now. And then you add climate change into the mix.
Right. Okay, let's talk about that. The articles mentioned it, but honestly, sometimes it feels like we hear climate change and just tune out. In real-world terms, how is it making things worse, specifically with hurricanes like Milton?
Think of warmer ocean water, like high-octane fuel for hurricanes. And the Gulf of Mexico is definitely warmer than it used to be.
Making them more intense.
Exactly. More fuel, more power. There was a study recently, I think it was out of Miami, found a direct link between ocean temperatures and how fast these hurricanes intensify.
And Milton's one of those rapid intensification ones, right? 75 miles per hour or stronger in just one day.
Yeah, that's not normal. But here's the thing. Climate change isn't just making these storms stronger. It's also making their impact worse once they actually hit land.
How so?
Remember that bathtub effect we talked about with the surge? Well, rising sea levels mean there's already more water in the tub, so to speak.
Ah, so even if a hurricane like Milton had hit Tampa Bay, say, 50 years ago, the surge wouldn't have been as bad because the baseline sea level was lower.
Exactly. That same AP article, they had this comparison. They said, if Hurricane Andrew, the one that slammed South Florida back in '92, if Andrew hit Tampa Bay today, the surge would be a full 7 inches higher.
7 inches just from sea level rise.
7 inches. And that's on top of everything else. It all adds up. And don't forget about rainfall. Either warmer air holds more moisture, so we're also seeing more extreme rain events during these hurricanes. Flooding becomes a huge issue on top of everything else.
So we've got a worst-case scenario brewing here. Powerful hurricane, climate change making it worse, all aimed at a uniquely vulnerable region. It's a lot to take in. But on a practical level, what can people do? What's being done right now to get ready for Milton?
The good news is authorities are taking this very seriously. This isn't a ride-it-out situation. Evacuation orders are already in place.
Evacuation orders for the whole Tampa Bay area.
6 counties. That's almost 4 million people being told to evacuate.
Wow. The articles mention mobile homes, RVs being especially dangerous in a surge. So if you're listening to this right now and you're in one of those evacuation zones, any hesitation about leaving?
Don't. Seriously. The article quoted Florida's emergency management director. He said, drowning deaths from storm surge are 100% preventable if you leave.
That's about as straightforward as it gets.
No room for debate there.
Chilling, but it really drives home the point that this is life or death. We can talk about science, we can talk about statistics, but ultimately it comes down to individual choices.
And that's where this whole historical luck versus scientific reality thing comes in. Tampa Bay has been fortunate, but that doesn't make it invincible.
Right. Tempting fate is not a good emergency plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This isn't about tempting fate. It's about making smart decisions with the information you've got.
Yeah.
And the information right now says, if you're in the path of this storm, get out.
It's like you said earlier, this isn't the Tampa Bay of 1921. The population, the climate, the risks are all different now.
This deep dive wasn't just about, the science of hurricanes or climate change in general. It was about giving our listeners the information they need to stay safe.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to something like this.
Couldn't agree more. Tampa Bay, and really anywhere vulnerable to these storms, we have to shift our thinking. From luck to resilience. We can't just rely on the past to predict the future anymore.
It's about adapting, building smarter, creating a future where cities like Tampa Bay don't just survive these challenges, but actually thrive despite them. That's a conversation we need to keep having long after this storm has passed. To our listeners, we urge you to take this information seriously, follow the guidance of local authorities, and above all, prioritize your safety. This has been a sobering deep dive, but an important one. Stay safe, everyone.